season, Webbit season, duck season, fire!
Welcome to the Go Use Australia podcast. It's the podcast for Australian shooters who just want the political interference taken out of shooting.
And welcome to another episode of Gun News Australia, brought to you by Politics Reloaded and Gun Traders Australia. And I'm with Phil Twiss and Nick Goiran from WA Parliament. How you doing, gents?
Fantastic. Good to be with you, Neil. Thanks for having us on the program.
No worries.
Yeah, very well, Neil. I'm glad to be here. Thanks.
Excellent. We're talking today about obviously WA gun laws, but more importantly, the motion, Nick, that you moved, and we'll get onto that a little bit later. But just to, I think, create a little bit of a story here, everyone will be aware of the changes that have happened in WA with under Labor, and some of the things that came out, some of the things that we saw over the last couple of years include the 50 caliber stunt at the Pierce, near the Pierce Air Base. There was the statement by former Police Minister Papalier for shooters to get a hobby if they don't like what the changes are going through. There's the photo opportunities that were had with the gel blasters. There was the sham consultation that occurred in the lead up to the introduction of the new Firearms Act. There was the publishing of the maps of the location of shooters. And of course, so the new laws that we've got now with health assessments and the like, that's quite a scorecard.
Yeah, absolutely. It's quite something just to hear you rattle them off. Actually, it's quite incredible when you think of them in sequence.
It's a behavioural issue there. It's nasty. It's vindictive, and I'm sure we're going to uncover that a little bit later too.
Yeah, there's patterns in other legislation as well that's come through with similar sort of sham consultations where they've said they've consulted but they haven't, or they've consulted but they've consulted with people who give them the answers that they want.
There's been no willingness to engage in any genuine process there. They've just ticked the boxes and said we've done that, and there was never any graciousness about it either at all. So Nick, you previously tabled a petition in the WA State Parliament which became one of the biggest, I think, in that state. Can you just quickly take us through that and what you think led to the sentiment that you saw in the number of signatures you got?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So this time last year, in fact, it was in May last year, I tabled a petition. It had more than 32,000 signatures. And to put that into some context, that is a record for an e-petition in Western Australia. It's an official parliamentary petition, was presented in Parliament. What people sometimes don't know is that petitions that are not official parliamentary petitions, they have some sort of symbolic value, but these ones are a little bit different because if they're in the upper house, they go to a parliamentary committee for its consideration. This one, again, was also a little bit different because it was specifically asking that the legislation, the proposed bill at the time, be referred to a parliamentary committee. As I say, 32,000, more than 32,000 was a record, still is a record for an e-petition. But quite incredibly, despite the fact of so many signatures, the government said no. And the opposition at that time, so my predecessor, Peter Collier, who was leader of the opposition and Legislative Council, he moved a motion that the bill, gigantic bill that it was, the new reforms, be referred to a parliamentary committee for further scrutiny. Nothing strange about that. Over 16 years I've been serving in the Parliament, many, many times legislation gets referred to the specialist committee. In fact, that's why it exists. The government said no. It's quite extraordinary. It shouldn't have happened, and it was a demonstration of gross arrogance.
Joining our Patreon channel means you can see episodes of Gun News Australia as soon as they come out, which means you can see them before they're published more widely. Plus, we'll be running Friday night live streams exclusively for members. It's a great way to support our work while getting the news you want to hear. So sign up as a member at patreon.com/Politics Reloaded.
Everybody knew about it. I mean, it was a record, 32,000, absolutely incredible. And keep in mind, these, what I would describe as fair-minded petitioners, all they were asking for is an opportunity to be heard. The petition wasn't saying pick up the bill and chuck it in the bin. That's not what the petition was saying. The petition was saying, please let us have an opportunity to be heard, and we request that the forum to be heard is the specialist parliamentary committee that scrutinises legislation. That was all that they were asking for. It would not have hurt the government to do that at all. And the really bizarre thing, Neil, about that whole episode is that, keep this in mind, last year, in fact, for the last 4 years, thankfully this has now changed, the government, that's the WA Labor government, they had control, total control of the upper house. So what could they possibly have feared by sending it to a committee, which, by the way, they also controlled? They had a majority of people on the committee. So the only thing that could have happened was a better piece of legislation, of which they would still be in total control of. And yet, despite that, they said no to these 32,000 people who just wanted to be heard. As I say it again, it was a gross episode of arrogance.
That's how we sort of saw it from this distance, at least too. And so, Phil, you also said something in Parliament recently that certainly got my attention, because it talks about, I think, the delegation of what may be some very important matters in legislation to the regulator. And the words you use that I've dropped here is the government effectively handed a bunch of powers over to the regulator, to the police, essentially, which has been writing up, in many cases, pretty much unworkable regulations. That's something that comes, I think, I'm very interested in terms of what you saw there, in terms of the relative, positions or roles of Parliament, stroke the minister, and the regulators. What was behind that?
What was behind it? I can kind of speculate, and I've had a lot of feedback from a lot of people who are aware of what's been going on in the background. I don't know if you're aware, there was the Uniform Legislation Committee met and did a report on the firearms, on that particular act, and they discovered 6 breaches of the Henry VIII clause, and there was also a number of other clauses in there which were effectively the Parliament handing over powers to the regulator. So instead of the Parliament writing the laws, basically gave lawmaking powers, through the regulations to the Commissioner and his delegates. So that was identified, and Nick would know better than I. That really, in my view, once that was identified, that should have been almost an automatic trigger to send it to review, to actually go back and actually fix up those clauses. That should have been an automatic response. But what was actually done was they went to the minister and asked the minister for responses on those things. So rather than saying, oh yes, we've breached these Henry VIII clauses and we've handed the powers of the Parliament, which I mentioned in my speech are actually the powers of the people of Western Australia, gave them to the executive government, to the police effectively, to be able to write those regulations, which now, as everyone knows, effectively has the force of law. The response from the police minister, if you go through and you read the responses in that report, were because there were concerns about overreach of the regulations, and their response was, well, okay, if there's an overreach of regulations, what we'll do is we'll go back through the Parliament and we'll fix them up then, which anyone who knows how the Parliament works knows that that's completely inadequate. It's worse. It's actually worse than a cop-out. Everyone knows that the process is slow, that by the time you've actually got it through the Parliament, if you can get it through the Parliament to get things corrected, where there are breaches of sort of things like civil liberties or conflicts of interest and all those sort of things which we're seeing now, and unworkable parts within the regulations, you've got to go back through the Parliament to unwind those things. So everything's backwards. So the powers have been handed over to the police effectively, who have been writing the legislation, writing large chunks of it and the regulations. And so you've reversed that part of it, but you've also reversed the ability to, so rather than making things right in the first place, you're going, well, we'll make a bunch of mistakes and then we'll fix them up later, with no regard for the lives of the people who are, there's the recreational shooters, there's the shooters who take care of, euthanizing animals, and the feral, hunting feral animals and those sort of things had a massive effect on them. But there's no mechanism apart really from going back through the Parliament to fix all of that up.
One of the things which I'm also interested in is in terms of the expertise that WA police have in, I think, making the decisions that they're being asked to make that affect shooters and the whole firearms industry. And that includes, they've been running around in recent times, I guess, advising clubs with ranges that they need to apply to they need to comply with new templates, range templates. And one of the things which really annoys me is the fact that sometimes regulators might think that they're perhaps more qualified in some spheres than others to make those sort of judgment calls. A lot of the ranges that I know have been affected by this are affiliated through to the International Shooting Sports Federation. Now, the ISSF is the body, it's a pathway if you want to compete at the Olympic Games, Commonwealth Games, World Cups, World Championships. ISSF is no small player. They've got nearly 150 member countries. We've got 140 employees. They have general assemblies every second year of their member countries. So whilst there's no cookie cutter template that's applied to ranges, they rely on a whole lot of requirements that what they call technical delegates who are expertise in this. So when it comes to, I guess, exercising expertise in this sphere, I know who I would back.
Yeah.
Rather than the regulator that thinks it knows best.
But the other question that arises from that, Neil, though, isn't it? And I hope that this comes out in the parliamentary inquiry, is why are we doing this?
Yeah.
So I look, my background is I have zero experience with regard to firearms. I don't have a license. I've never shot a firearm in my life. Never been to one of these ranges that you're talking about. But if there is an issue that needs to be fixed, and they're saying that it now needs to comply with a certain template and certain rules and regulation, sure, I don't have any evidence to suggest that that's needed or not needed. But the onus is on the government who want to change it to demonstrate that there's a need in the first place. What have been the incidents that have emerged at these ranges that then justify the need for these particular changes? Now, if they can argue a case for it, great. I'll probably be the first guy to sign up for it and say, look, there's been all these horrific incidents at these ranges, and we don't want to ever see that ever again. So let's sharpen up our safety and protocols. I'm not aware of any. Now, if I'm wrong about that, I would invite the government to present evidence of those incidents that then justify those things. That's why a parliamentary inquiry is so important, because the government's not going to be able to get away with that litany of examples that you gave at the start of your show, of all of the publicity. It sounds all very good, but they can't even answer a basic question like that. Well, what is actually the problem with our ranges at the moment?
The only incident I'm aware of is the use of a 50 caliber range at a 50 caliber rifle
Yes.
at the wrong range. Sorry,
Yeah.
Phil, I think you're about to say something there.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've had a lot of feedback on that, because as sure you know, that quite a few ranges have ended up voluntarily closing. Shooters have had to go to other ranges to keep part of it's to keep the number of shoots up per year to go to different ranges, and it's almost like they've been falling one after the other. So they'll move from one range, they'll voluntarily close it down, because if the police close you down based on a breach of the new regulations, then actually reopening is a much more onerous and much more difficult process, if you can even get through it. As I understand it, they've applied some sort of NATO template to the ranges, which I don't know where that's come from. Again, I'm not all over the detail. I've just had a lot of feedback, and when you talk about particular people who claim to be experts writing the regulations, I'm the first person to bristle at the sound of technocrats, experts claiming to have all of the answers and to apply their whatever it is, their pet projects and things on top of things. I was having a conversation with someone the other day about this issue, about the writing of these regulations, and it just struck me that for someone, one or two people, maybe more than that, 3 or 4 people perhaps, who are actually writing most of these regulations, I would be very worried about that, because they'll put a lot of weight, they put a lot of risk upon themselves, and they're basically taking upon themselves all of the risk and all of the consequences that could come out of the ill effects of these regulations, and there are many. I'd be very worried, because rather than going through the Parliament and rather than going through a proper review process and having a very open and transparent inquiry and process into what needs to be done, they've gone out and they've done a lot of this stuff themselves. I'd be worried because who's going to take responsibility? Who's the one who's going to be held accountable for all of the issues that are arising now? Something for them to think about, I would think.
You mentioned NATO templates. That's military.
Yes.
So I'll leave that one to one side.
That's what I've heard they've been using. Yeah.
But again, Neil, the thing is there, okay, if they want to use these NATO templates, of which I've got no experience or background in, right, then make the case for it. Explain why it's necessary. But this is the problem. None of that's been done. It's just been take it or leave it. This is how it is. My way or the highway. Everything we've done is perfect. There's nothing to critique here. If you don't support what we're doing, then you must, by definition, then want to see guns on every single corner of Western Australia. And it's just been this hyper exaggerated propaganda. And I get it. I mean, it's at one level, it's been politically effective, right? But is it the right thing to do? Is that what we expect in a modern democracy? Well, I argue absolutely not.
So with the motion that you moved, Nick, can you just give a bit of a, I guess just a bit of explanation of how it started and basically the path that you took to get it to where it is now? Can you tell us about that?
Sure. I mean, look, the single biggest factor in all of it was the change in the composition of the upper house. So some people have said, why has it taken this long? Well, it's simply a case of our democracy works in 4-year cycles. The Cook Labor government had total control of the upper house in the last 4 years. That changed by virtue of the election. Sure, look, Phil and I, from our party's perspective as Liberals, we were disappointed with the outcome of the election, but the outcome is the outcome, and you then work with the new circumstances you find yourself in. On the 22nd of May, which happens every 4 years, the upper house changes hands, and the new MLCs get sworn in, of which both Phil and I are honoured to serve in this next parliament for the next 4 years. That radically changed this and gave us the opportunity to do something because Labor lost control. You need 19 votes in this new legislative council to be successful in anything. So the government needs 19 votes. The opposition needs 19 votes. You want to do anything, you need 19. That's the magic number. Phil and I are part of the official opposition, working in alliance with the National Party. We're 10 members, they're 2, so that's 12. We still needed another 7 votes. Meanwhile, the government have got 15 votes on the floor of the parliament. They give up 1 to be the president. So they've got 15 and we've got 12. And you need 19. So we had to do work. We have to talk to the crossbench. You've got to talk to One Nation, Australian Christians, Legalised Cannabis, Animal Justice Party, and the Greens. And, credit where credit's due. Each of those parties understood that what's happened here is wrong. Now, each of those parties have got wildly different political perspectives on this issue and on many issues. But in terms of the process, the arrogance of the Cook Labor government in the last parliament, the suggestion that what they've done is perfect, that it wasn't subject to review, well, that's been borne out to be completely incorrect. We can look no further than the State Administrative Tribunal calling out the government last year, the police for issuing disqualification letters when they had no power to do so. The GPs are up in arms about these sign-offs that they now need to participate in. We know privately that there are police officers that are not happy with this whole shambolic fiasco. So credit where credit's due. It was a team effort. I don't think one individual can take claim it as a personal win. Someone had to move the motion. I'm the leader of the Opposition Legislative Council now. It was my privilege to do so, and I'm grateful to everybody for supporting it. And in the end, government had to accept the result in a very fake and phony way, I might say. They said, "Oh, look, we'll support this motion." The reality is they were embarrassed into the situation. They had no real option. They effectively didn't oppose it, and because it would be pointless to do so, and it would be an official loss on the record after only a few days of the new Legislative Council. So all of those factors had to come together. bit of a perfect storm, if you like. And for the sake of our democracy, it's at least we've got off to a good start for the next 4 years.
And I think, just to be clear, all this is really, it gives us the green light to review the legislation. It does not mean that because the Greens and Animal Justice Party support it, that they're necessarily going to support any future changes to the Acts. We don't know that because they're philosophically opposed or different, in a different space to where we are.
Look, and I don't know what the recommendations are going to be either that come out of this committee. I mean, we now need to wait and see. They've got a job to do. There's 5 members of parliament who have a duty now to listen to affected individuals and then produce a series of recommendations. They've got 3 months to do that. We're waiting at the moment to see when submissions open. I imagine, on past experience, that that'll be imminent. I would imagine that probably sometime in the next fortnight, we'll be hearing from them. Typically, they advertise for submissions and those kind of things. So we're in this waiting period. Neither Phil or I are on that committee, so we have no inside information. We just have to wait for probably the next couple of weeks, I suspect.
Okay, well, thank you for that, because there were a couple of questions there that I had for you, which you've just answered, so I appreciate that. Okay, so we'll hold. I think we'll watch this space for the time being, and obviously we'll push that message out when it comes through. I think one thing which I just wanted to quickly touch on is the fact that WA is part of the National Firearms Agreement. There's a signatory to it. There are so many things in the agreement WA doesn't do, and it makes me wonder why Western Australia even remains a signatory of it. What's your view on in terms of the I guess the application of the NFA to Western Australia's situation? Do you think there's a need to bring WA into line? Is there some mechanism to enable that to happen?
Well, that's a great submission to make to the committee. You see, I mean, just even what you've just said there. I mean, that's concise. It's simple. Bring it to the attention of the 5 members of the committee. Perhaps draw to their attention a few examples. Doesn't have to be a comprehensive list, but a few examples where there is that inconsistency, and ask them that question. The government have said, "Oh, this is all about uniform laws, national consistency." Well, if that's untrue, it's useful to expose that. And people like yourself and others who have expertise and experience in that, I would definitely encourage you to put in a submission.
Yeah, and the discussion, and I'm not an expert on the National Firearms Agreement, but what I've been told about it, that a lot of the issues that are coming out of this firearms legislation now would be resolved pretty much straight away. And a lot of the recommendations that were made in the previous Law Reform Commission review would be resolved through that National Firearms Agreement almost automatically. Some of the land, the property letters and those sorts of things. A lot of people don't realise most other states, I don't think any other states actually have property letters or any of those sorts of issues. A lot of that would be resolved almost automatically by taking on those provisions and signing up to it. But yeah, it's one of those things that really needs to be in the submission. A lot of people have spoken to me about it, but there's a lot of detail in there that needs to be looked at more closely.
I've got a list of things here. I'm not going to go through them.
Yeah.
I'll mention one and then we'll move on. The fact that if you want to acquire a firearm in WA, you need to license it, and the licensing cost is $445. If you want to use a permit to acquire I'm in Victoria, the same thing costs $9.20.
Yeah.
So it tells you something.
Yeah.
I'm suspicious that the process might actually be part of the punishment in Western Australia.
Well, in Western Australia, fees are not subject to public scrutiny. What happens in some other states is that if you want to change fees, that goes through what they call a regulatory impact statement process, where you have to make out the argument to the public saying this is the cost, these are the benefits, this is the reasoning, make a submission. But in Western Australia, the fees are set by Treasury. So, yeah. Phil and Nick, just as we wind this up, what parting messages do you have for shooters, particularly those in WA who are interested in this process and want to see something change?
There's really 2 things, I think, going forward that we really need to focus on. And one is keep an eye out for the submissions, and my Facebook page and socials and newsletters we'll keep people up to date on that. And I've got some other things going on that you'll sort of find out about fairly soon. So be aware of the submissions and work together if you can with sort of other experts to put those submissions together and be ready to present them to the committee. And the other one is keep the pressure on with particularly the Labor members of Parliament, but also Liberals. I think we're pretty aligned on it, but just keep the pressure on. My inbox is full of emails from people, and a lot of them have actually been very, very good and very constructive. And I've given a lot of detail, a lot of personal stories and effects and things like that. So that pressure needs to keep moving, because this is not just a review issue, it's actually a political issue. So whatever comes out of the review, if you want to see change from that, there has to be a political pressure and political change associated with that. And you're not going to get anywhere if you're not being constructive and you're being critical and unpleasant about it. You need to be very, very, very measured in the way that you speak to the members of Parliament, or they'll ignore you. But be constructive and provide them information and provide them the stories that people have got. There's some of these things of shooting with disabilities and things like that are heartbreaking to hear those sort of stories. I've got tons of those, and I mentioned some in the Parliament. People need to hear those, and members of Parliament need to hear those. They need to hear the effects that are occurring in people's lives.
Yeah, from me, Neil, I mean, I reiterate what Phil said, but first and foremost, one message I would leave for law-abiding, responsible firearm owners is well done. Perseverance matters. Persistence matters in politics. It would have been easy to give up, but it was their determination to continue with this month after month. Been an utterly exasperating process. I know for some of them, they've been waiting for a very long time. People advocated for a review by the Law Reform Commission, which handed down its report in 2016. I mean, how frustrating it must be for people then to see something gathering dust, only then to emerge and be inconsistent with that. But they stuck at it. So, my first parting message is well done to a responsible, law-abiding firearms owners out there who have persisted and persevered. The second thing is do follow Phil on Facebook, on YouTube, on any social media channels that you're involved in, because he's certainly going to be leading the charge in this respect, with the objective of making sure that there is sensible regulation of firearms. That's absolutely the Liberal Party position. We support sensible regulation of firearms. But what hasn't happened here has been fair consultation. There's been arrogance. We don't support that at all. Now there's a proper process. And the third thing is, as Phil has mentioned, focus your attention on the committee. Hold fire, pardon the pun, hold fire for the next couple of weeks. Wait for the submissions process to come out, and then utilise that process. It's been a long fight to get here. Now there's an opportunity for people's voices to be heard. Make a submission to the committee, and then we wait for the outcome. In 3 months, we find out what their recommendations are, and then a new campaign will emerge, because then we want the government to listen to those recommendations and implement those recommendations expeditiously. This has been a government that can operate in lightning speed when it wants to. And so if there's going to be some solid recommendations that come out of the review, we would want them implemented straight away so we can fix up this fiasco.
Okay, Nick Goiran and Phil Twiss, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you coming on the program, and we'll see you later.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, Neil.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Gun News Australia. And if you're a supporter through Patreon, you'll get access to early release of the episodes as soon as they're uploaded. And you'll also get access to our Friday night live streams. So to support our work, simply go to patreon.com/politicsreloaded, or use the QR code on the screen, or see the description in this episode for details.